your question, and we won't read out your name on the recording. The next logistical issue is that we are going to be using video today, so could you please ensure that your computer volume is turned on and up? That will allow you to be able to see and hear the video that's going to be portrayed or played during today's webinar. And call-in users will not see or hear this. If you are only a call-in user, you won't be able to see the video, but we'll be ensuring that the link to the video is sent out afterwards so that everyone can have an opportunity to see that video. So thanks for joining us. Last logistical question, comment before we get going is Twitter. We actually had a fair bit of action on Twitter for those of you who were on Twitter during the last webinar. And so we wanted to invite people to use the hashtag, it starts with me, and cultural humility. And we also have 2 Twitter handles being used today for our presenters, and that's Shelley Joseph and then Reconciliation Canada, of course. And those are both up on the screen and on all the screens. And so I'm going to hand it now. One more last final thing, sorry, is that there is sensitive subject matter. We know that due to the sensitive nature of this conversation, we want to just remind people to please ensure that you've got a support system in place if it surfaces any issues. We've also provided here the toll-free crisis line here in the province of BC, 1-800-588-8717. Or if you prefer, have a local number prepared that you can connect with here. And the last one, I'm going to hand it now. Katie, I'm going to hand the ball over to you to introduce our elder and our speakers today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katie Foster. I'm the Quality Care and Safety Manager with First Nations Health, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our elder today, as Gertrude Pierre is a Sechelt Nation elder and a residential school survivor. Attending residential school for 10 years did not hold Gertrude back at all. After years of healing, she graduated with a Bachelor of Social Working in 2011 at the age of 65. She's currently working with the Aboriginal Front Door Society and the Vancouver Aboriginal Community Policing Center to help people in the downtown east side. Welcome, Gertie. I'll also introduce Shelley Joseph, and then I'll pass the ball over to Gertrude to open the day. So Shelley Joseph will be presenting. She is a public outreach lead and cultural advisor. Shelley brings over 25 years of experience paired with education, covering spiritual, physical, mental, and emotional well-being for families and communities. She is passionate about supporting First Nations people to take an active role in healing and growth, utilizing a holistic approach to well-being. Shelley has always followed traditional teachings through a lifetime of learning from elders and cultural leaders, aligning with Reconciliation Canada idea about creating a better tomorrow for our children. Shelley lives by the, I'm not going to say this well, Kwak-Wak-Kwak-Law, if not for our children, what would our purpose be? And has always believed in the Kwak-Wala phrase, Kwala you are my reason for living. Rounding out her beliefs and cultural values, Shelley is excited to continue to move the work of Reconciliation Canada forward and be a part of her dad's legacy. I will pass it over to Gertrude now to open the webinar.
I would first like to thank the Snohomish people for the land that we are on. And I'd like to thank Shelley for coming here today to speak on reconciliation. I ask the grandfathers and grandmothers to help her with the words that she needs to share with those that have attended residential school and that are products of residential school and that are still suffering the effects of the residential school. I thank the people that are going to listen and share their stories and ask questions because they need to continue their healing with this area in their life. O Noms Charlap.
Gertrude. I really am a firm believer in prayer and that we need to bring the Creator and our ancestors to walk with us in this important work for all of our people, and especially our children. So thank you for starting us off in a good way with a prayer. I really appreciate it. Gaelic Hesla. And thank you, Katie, for the introduction. Again, my name is Shelley Joseph. My traditional name is Hekwagela Ogwa. I come from the Kwakwakuak, or the Kwakwa-speaking people on the north tip of Vancouver Island and the adjacent mainland. My father is Chief Robert Joseph, hereditary chief. His traditional name is Quin Quiligidzi. My mother is Donna Joseph, descendant of the Hunt family. Her traditional name is Quintilauk. In my upbringing, I was always taught that I need to let people know who my family is and where I come from. And I think we do that because it gives us a sense of belonging. And that's so important, especially in the world that we now live in today, that we have that sense of belonging, that it gives us a foundation to grow on. Currently, I work with my dad and my sister at Reconciliation Canada. We have a team of, I think there's 18 of us now. And could I have a slide on the next? Thank you. A team of about 18 now. We began in August of 2012. My father, who is an Indian residential school survivor, had been working on the residential school file for about 20 years at the time. He became very ill in 2012. He was diagnosed with cancer, so he called my sister to his bedside and talked to her about this vision that he had about 50,000 people walking through the streets of Vancouver in the spirit of unity. So when he was sick, he called my sister to her bedside and said he really wanted this walk to happen. So my sister was in a great place at the time, pulled some people and resources together, and we formed Reconciliation Canada in 2012. And really what we wanted to do was to highlight the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was coming to Vancouver in 2013. So for 1 year, we hit the pavement running, engaged with the city and executive directors all throughout Vancouver and British Columbia to engage citizens in reconciliation, in the dialogue on reconciliation, and what is it and what does it mean, and to invite people to this walk for reconciliation that we held on September 22nd in 2013. Now, my dad's vision was 50,000 people, and despite many telling him, well, maybe you should be realistic and say 10,000, but he was adamant it was going to be 50,000. So we maintained that number throughout the year we were engaging. And on September 22nd, 2013, it was said that 70,000 people came to walk for reconciliation on that day. And I still get choked up thinking about it, what that must have been like for my dad as a residential school survivor who was there for 11 years and experienced all of the dehumanizing things that he had, to stand in front of a crowd of 70,000 people who cared. I think for the most part that a lot of the survivors felt like nobody cared, nobody listened to their story, nobody validated their experiences. And what that must have been like for them that day, probably the wettest day in Vancouver ever. I'm not sure how many of you actually came to the walk, but it was so amazing. And I think, you know, it was so wet. The rain was pouring through umbrellas even, and still 70,000 people came and walked because they cared. What a huge action. That's an actionable item. Just to be there to say I care is an actionable item for reconciliation. And that 70,000 people came out that day, it still amazes me when I think about it today. So at Reconciliation Canada, we continue to have our reconciliation dialogue workshops. We're now expanding across the country. We are an Indigenous-led organization. We're a charitable organization. And I believe what we really do is we create a safe space for people to come together to have this dialogue and encourage people to make their own action plan so it's theirs and they own it and nobody can change that or alter that. And I believe that's what we do. You know, we're a catalyst for that change. We're a catalyst for people to make their own action plans and invite people into the dialogue and into the conversation. Could I have the next slide? When I first began at Reconciliation Canada in 2012, my very first initiative was to gather elders. In my cultural upbringing, I was always told that if I'm going to be doing any important work for our people, that I need to get the advice of elders. So in November of 2012, I gathered elders from all different backgrounds, Indigenous, Chinese, Japanese, Jewish, Indians, elders from the church, and we gathered for 2 days to speak about the language of reconciliation. And I think what we really gathered from that was that in all of the ancient teachings from all of the peoples from around the world was that we had these ceremonies and songs and dances and legends that spoke to reconciliation, but we just didn't have the word reconciliation. Like, I know in my own culture, we have ceremonies to help people, like rites of passage, coming of age ceremonies, ceremonies for weddings and deaths and all of these different events in our lives where we need to come to terms with something, and how do we grow into the next part of our lives in a healthy and good way. And I think all of those ceremonies really speak to reconciliation, and it's something that's been embedded in all the ancient teachings from around the world, not just Indigenous people, but they've somehow been left behind or forgotten in our corporate world today. So right now, I'd like to share a video from that gathering that I had of elders back in 2012. Can we show the video?
Yes, Maddie's just going to show the video. It'll just be 1 minute.
Thank you.
This is a historical moment for all of us, being in this great house today to gather your wisdom, to gather your strength, to gather your ideas about reconciliation. Reconciliation is recognizing that a harm was done, that taking young children from their homes generation after generation for over 100 years was wrong. Denying these children the ability to learn their languages was wrong. That treating them abusively was wrong.
In our naivety and our
Can I have the next slide, please? In the video, the youth, who she's actually my daughter, said that reconciliation, another word for reconciliation is courage. And it really is, it's highly contested as much as the word is used today. It's really a highly contested idea, and it takes courage to step into this movement of reconciliation. So first of all, thank you all for even entertaining the idea and coming to listen today about what our idea of reconciliation is. And to not get weary. Don't get weary. At the walk, our keynote speaker was Dr. Bernice King. I hope each of you take the time to listen to her speech. But I think what that really spoke to was that reconciliation is a journey, and it's probably not something that we're ever going to fully achieve, probably not in my lifetime or yours. But to do everything that we can in our power so that our children won't have to do the same work, won't ever experience the hardships that Indian residential school survivors experienced, or even us as intergenerational survivors of reconciliation. So really, reconciliation has to begin with each one of us. Reconciliation starts with me, and it starts with you. And from there, we can integrally grow out reconciliation in a really strong, founded way. And so I'm going to ask each of you to take a moment or two to think to yourselves, what does reconciliation mean to me? So to think about something in your life where you've needed reconciliation with a partner, a parent, a child, a coworker, where you've needed to reconcile that. And what was it that made you feel that reconciliation? So I'm going to ask you now to take a moment just to think about, what does reconciliation mean to me? And can I have the next slide, please? So maybe now, if you're able, we can have some of you, there we go, these words are popping up about what reconciliation means to you. Understanding, healing, love, learning, restitution, reconnection, strong, open hearts, mutual process, growth, knowledge, acceptance, humility, restoring harmony, value, forgiveness, self-actualization, oh, thank you all. And I hope you wrote that down for yourselves too, to keep with you. Rebirth, reflection. All of those words and ideas of what you think reconciliation is true. And I want you to hold that as you move forward in this webinar and when you go to work and start growing reconciliation in your community, in your family life, at work, at home, everywhere, that you hold on to this because it's true, because every individual needs something different to feel reconciled. And we can't just leave this up to the government and the churches to have reconciliation, that this really is something that we each can own and grow in our lives. So much of what is happening to our people in Canada now has been imposed on us from the top down. We all live in these silos that we were born into, and we're not even really aware. Indigenous and non-Indigenous people were born into these silos of how we interact with one another or don't interact with one another. We were born into them, and they were imposed from the top down. And it's my strong belief that we're going to have our personal reconciliation down here in these circles with the people in our lives, and we're going to grow it up in our country. So that's why I really believe that reconciliation begins with me. So reconciliation begins with you. If we think about it this way, then we all have a role to play. What kind of a world do we want to leave for our children? I know in my introduction it says the word "kuola'yu," and it means my reason for living. And I tell my children that they are my reason for living. And I say that, and it drives me to do whatever I can to create the kind of community, society that I live in, that my children are going to grow up in. And that's why this is so important. It's always for the next generations, and these are traditional teachings, you know, that most First Nations people carry across North America even. And, you know, like I said earlier, even in all of the ancient peoples from around the world, they all had these core values, and we need to wake those up in everybody. And I think that's how we're going to change the types of relationships that we have with one another and be able to make concrete plans from that new relationship to create a new way forward. Could I have the next slide, please? So my father, you know, in speaking about that reconciliation belongs to me, we've come up with this back pocket reconciliation action plan. And my dad has always talked about it, that it's something that you can pull out of your back pocket, a little sheet of paper, and this is something that you can do anywhere with anybody, wherever you are and whoever you're with, you know, to listen actively, or just to be there, or to smile, or to look into somebody's eyes, whether it's something that you always do or something new that you can do to create this new way forward in your own life. So I encourage all of you to go to our website and to download this template, the Back Pocket Reconciliation Action Plan, and create one for yourself, and also share it with the people in your lives, in your home, in your workplace, clients, your teams, anybody who, who's open and willing to engage in reconciliation in this way. Can I have the next slide, please? So now I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to think about reconciliation in your workspace. And to begin, I'd like for you to take a moment to think about the blue sky of reconciliation, meaning when we are reconciled, our workplace will look like this, or can people still hear me? Okay, people can still hear me? That when we are reconciled, our children will, my life will look like. When we are reconciled, our community will be. To think that grandly, and from there, from that vision, we'll narrow it down into actual tangible things that we can do in our workspace and even in our homes to create this reconciled world that we dream of. I think we need to have that big vision so that we can start with these small, tangible, what I can do steps to work towards that grand vision, the blue sky, when we are reconciled. So there are two questions on the screen I think that we can begin to answer. If you want to start maybe typing in your answers or writing it down for yourself. What action towards reconciliation can I make as an individual leader in my community? And what action towards reconciliation can we make together as influencers in our community? Now, I'm sure there are probably a ton of initiatives going on with the First Nations Health Authority. I've seen some resources earlier of acts that are reconciliation. I almost feel like I'm preaching to the choir here because there's so many great things going on within the First Nations Health Authority. Even this whole program of, the webinars that are happening, they all speak to reconciliation. I think the only thing that really has been missing is the language about what reconciliation is. So first of all, I really want to commend all of you for the work that you have been doing within the First Nations Health Authority to grow reconciliation. And secondly, to say, a lot of the initiatives that have begun are already about reconciliation. They just haven't been named such. And thirdly, I just want to say, continue to have that big dream and to make these goals in your workplaces, with your teams, with your clients. Speaking of cultural humility and the knowledge and UNDRIP, the United Nations Declarations for Rights and Indigenous People here in Canada, they all speak to those cultural traditions and elevating, when we begin to lift one another up, which means when I see the gift in you and I help you to grow that to be the best person that you can be, then we're achieving reconciliation in the most personal, human, and spiritual ways. So to keep on with the initiatives that are already happening within the First Nations Health Authority. I encourage all of you to read the 94 recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And, a lot of them say we call on the federal government or the provincial government to do this and that. But I think we can all support our governments, contact your local MLAs or MPs and all of those people, write support letters or give them ideas. Continue reaching out to elders like the one that we had open this webinar for guidance. I think they have a lot of experience. They have their life stories. And that's the other thing I think that society is missing today that can really help grow reconciliation is when we can sit down and listen to another person's story, actively listen without the filters, the questions, or I'm going to fix that for them, but really just to listen with an open heart and an open mind. That's the most empowering thing we can do for another human being is to listen. So I encourage you to grow that more in your practices. in all of your relationships. You know, like just yesterday, there was a unanimous vote in the House. All the MPs voted in favor of the motion to end discrimination in First Nations child welfare. Huge, huge. I can't even begin to express the amount of hope that has given me. The hope that UNDRIP, all of the, you know, building up the respect and building up people. That's the most important thing that we have, and we forget that in this corporate world. You know, we do have policies and procedures to follow, but we need to remember that the person sitting across from us around the boardroom table is a human being. They have a story, they have an experience, and for us to practice our listening skills, to practice compassion. And the main thing that I want to end with is love. You know, it has become so uncomfortable to a lot of people in our workplaces, but I think we need to normalize it. We need to grow love in all of our lives, wherever we are, to be loving human beings. And I think that's going to be the absolute key to reconciliation. Moving all of these actions forward is love. So thank you all for taking the time to listen to me today, and I love you.
Thank you very much for that compelling presentation and sharing the story around reconciliation. We've taken a couple minutes in the chat box. There's a few postings in the chat box I wanted to bring to people's attention. The findings and calls to action from Reconciliation Commission are available there, as are the panel, the pocket cards that you shared, Shelley. We've also posted those, and we'll post them up again. Just allowing time for questions during the presentation today. If you wouldn't mind just coming back, thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing your words, Shelley. And when you talk about it coming back to love, that seems to be so common in all the work we do. It comes down to the people and knowing who the people are who we work with and understanding their story and their experience. Just wanted to open up now for you, Shelley, and for the people who joined the call today is any questions that people have. In terms of questions they have for Shelley, if you'd like to either raise your hand using the hand symbol or post your question in the chat box, and we'll share it out to Shelley for her to respond. So we'll just give it a couple minutes right now for people to either raise their hand or pop their question into the chat box.
I think we have the next slide as well.
All right, we do have a question I just noticed in the chat box. So here we go. We find using the word reconcile dangerous, as if it can be accomplished. How do you quantify how reconciliation is achieved? We see reconciliation as a process that demands continuous attention and has no endpoint. Can you speak to that?
What was the beginning of that again?
Sure. We find using the word reconcile dangerous, this is from our chat box, as it can be accomplished. How do you quantify how reconciliation is achieved?
I'm missing the beginning of the first word, the reckon.
So the question was, we find using the word reconcile dangerous, as it can be accomplished. So it assumes it's something that can be completed. So the question the person is asking is, how do you quantify how reconciliation is achieved?
Okay. I'm not sure about the reconciled dangerous part, but I think it can be achieved through real listening to one another, whoever you are across the table with or in a circle with, but to practice active listening and responding without reacting first, I think. And to quantify reconciliation, that's really going to be an individual assessment from each person as they step into this movement of reconciliation. There isn't going to be any one single answer about when reconciliation is achieved or felt by any other individual other than our own reconciliation.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. Okay. So another question or comment, this is an anonymous one coming from the group, is looking at how you present this brings to mind the question of looking at how do we continue to overcome blatant ignorance.
Overcome blatancy? Blatant ignorance. Yeah. That is a tough one. Thank you, Poodley. I've actually been there in the last little while, and yeah, it was hurtful, but I really hung on to hope. I had to just hang on to hope in that moment, and you know, I said a prayer. Well, I walked away from the incident first. I said a prayer, gathered myself, and I went back and you know, just expressed how I felt in the moment, and the other person was actually quite receptive and understood that their actions hurt me, which they had never done before. But yeah, it was really just the hope in humanity that if, you know, I came as my best self, my highest self, meaning my spiritual self, from that loving place, from love, you know, I had the hope that it was going to have a better outcome than the actual incident itself, and it did. You know, not to say that, you know, oftentimes we may not feel safe enough to do that, perhaps to go and find some support, you know, people in our lives or at work who we can sit with and share about, you know, those types of incidences that happen, and to get some outside perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Shelley. There's some interesting comments coming into the group too. Just to read these out, some of the outcomes can be raised awareness, understanding, and solutions around what reconciliation means to them. Just in terms of the previous question, I wanted to share that. And thanks for sharing your question as well. So another question has come in. You say not to be weary, that we do this work so that our children don't have to. It feels like there are still so many boundaries, so many hoops set up by non-Indigenous people that as an Indigenous people have to jump through in order to address inequality. Do you have any advice for us for navigating the dominant patriarchal system?
Well, that's so true, and that's why I say don't get weary. This work is so important. I would rather jump through these hoops myself than to leave it for my children. And, you know, that's my driving force for almost everything that I do, including the work in Reconciliation Canada, is so that our children don't have to experience these same things. And I think that for my dad to come from residential school after 11 years of the dehumanizing things he experienced there, you know, he came out and went through his own hardships. He went into alcoholism and all the dysfunctions that brings, and he's grown from there. Both my parents sobered up in 1977 and have been working really hard on themselves and growing. But I often think if he came from such a hard place, and to be the man that he is today and to have the hope that he has today for all Indian residential school survivors, for all of us as kids, but for all of our children and all Canadians, to have that kind of hope, who am I not to have the same? Who am I not to do everything I can for my children? So yeah, it's really hard. It's hard work. Reconciliation isn't for the weak, really. To be courageous and to not get weary, it's self-determining.
So I have a question for you relating to that, Shelley. When you think about not to get weary and stay courageous, are there any things you specifically do to maintain your energy around this work and to maintain your courage?
To maintain our courage?
Yeah.
I think I maintain my own integrity in all of this because of the people I surround myself with. You know, the like-minded, the dreamers and the hopers and the people who exude love and the people who lift me up. And that's how I continue on, because yeah, we've run into so many walls and jumped through hoops. You know, but it's rather than focusing on the one negative person in the crowd, to listen to the other 8 who are going, yeah, you can do it. You know, changing the way we see the world that way and what we focus on really helps. So that would be my recommendation for anybody stepping into reconciliation, is to surround yourself with the like-minded people, with people who are in your balcony cheering you on, cheering you up.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. I noticed that Lindsay Heller has a check mark next to her name. I want to give you a space for a question if that's what you had there. So, Lindsay, we're just going to unmute your line and invite you to share your question, if that's all right. Please go ahead, Lindsay. Are you still there, Lindsay? All right, looks like we may not have a question there after all, Shelley. Any other questions before we wrap up today's call? Great. I'm just going to take a moment to thank you, Shelley. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, to be part of the session and to actually share your thoughts and ideas. I see another question's come in. I don't want to miss these 2 questions that have come in. So what does reconciliation look like to you in healthcare system for our BC First Nations? So what would we see in the healthcare system with reconciliation?
I think within the First Nations Health Authority, a lot has already been done. You know, the cultural awareness, the diversity of cultures in British Columbia, honoring and recognizing traditional ways of being and healing, traditional ways of being healthy. I think that's really important to First Nations people here in British Columbia. And I know that the Health Authority is already doing so much of that work. But just to continue to reach out to the prospective communities where you work and to learn their specific cultural practices and traditions and medicines and healings specific to the land, and recognizing that and honoring that and growing that within the Health Authority, I think is, yeah, it's been great work so far, and I applaud any and all actions to continue to grow that in the Health Authority. I think it's going to be really beneficial for all people, all First Nations people here in British Columbia.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really interesting. You know, and some of the challenges along the way, people talked about, you know, maintaining energy and keeping your passion and energy and your courage for this work. And there's a really interesting question that came into the chat box, and it was about how would you suggest introducing this to a reluctant colleague? So maybe somebody who's not ready to learn about this or understand the issues.
Yeah, you know, reconciliation, I know, yeah, I understand here I'm preaching to the choir because everybody's, you know, you're here because you have an invested interest in it. But to the people who aren't ready yet, I would just suggest maybe sharing what reconciliation means to you, and maybe ask them what reconciliation means to them. Maybe it's that lack of understanding that keeps them from engaging, that they think it's not, that they don't have a part to play in reconciliation, but really inviting them into the conversation about what does it mean and what can we do. Maybe that would help engage the people who aren't quite there yet.
Good words of wisdom, Shelley. There's another interesting question that came into the chat box as well. And what are some ideas to help build awareness of what is being reconciled and why? So for people who are new Canadians or to an international audience, for example. So why has this happened and why is it important? What is sort of, what are some ideas on how that can be accomplished?
Really, I think it's creating a safe space to have dialogue with somebody else or even a group of people or your teams to start having the conversations about, but really inviting, first of all, the exercise of listening actively, to listen without, because most of the times we come to the meeting with, I'll come with my agenda and you have your agenda and we both share it, but nobody's really listening. But to invite everybody to begin listening to the others first before responding. And I think, you know, the second part is inviting everybody to come to the table with an understanding that everybody has a story, everybody has an experience in this country. And that I think we really need to begin to embrace the diversity, because we literally have everybody from around the world here in Canada. You know, all the diversities from around the world are here. And when we begin to embrace that, that's when we're going to find our common humanity. And I think that's the best way to move forward, rather than discriminating or putting us in more silos, or trying to get everybody to be this one mold of Canadian. I think the best way forward is going to be to embrace our diversities and grow that in all of our people, empower people.
I think that embracing diversity is such a really interesting point and such an important point. Really interesting question from Trevor Kehoe as well, and he said, if we could wave a wand, what would be one thing health authorities can do to support reconciliation in healthcare?
If I could wave a wand, I would make love a natural word, natural for everybody to share, a natural action for everybody to be giving. That would be my magic wand, is love.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think we've covered all the questions that came in the chat box there. I'm just making sure we didn't miss any more, but thank you so much. One last question I don't think I have read out is, are there support groups for people doing this work? So people who are advancing reconciliation, are there groups that people can connect in with?
I believe there are still resolution health support workers. You can reach them through the IRSSS, and I'm not sure who else. But yeah, they would probably, there's probably a whole lot of grassroots people. You know, we don't hear as much as we'd like to. I'm always forever asking, you know, people to share with us what they've done, or you know, the groups they've gathered, or the actions or the initiatives that they've taken around reconciliation, because that's what fuels me, is when I hear about all these wonderful, wonderful things that are going on. So I encourage all of the listeners, if you know anything, to share, you know, what groups or things that you know are happening in British Columbia around reconciliation. And I wanted to end with saying, you know, there really are so many initiatives going on for reconciliation, and I think all of them are important, and all of them need to be happening in order for us to achieve, you know, moving forward in reconciliation in a good way. And, you know, that we need to start lifting and elevating all of the programs up all together, and not competing on for any of them.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a million thanks coming into the chat box right now, Shelley. Just want to make sure you're seeing those and taking the time to read them. But really a lot of thanks for your time, for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, and really inspiring people on today's call. So on behalf of all the participants and FNHA, I wanted to thank you very much for joining us today and taking the time to share your story and share some tangible strategies that people can start thinking about. So, you know, we always ask for an action at the end of the call, and I think your pocket guides and encouraging people to really download those pocket guides and give it a try is a great step. We've had our questions discussion. Just wanted to take a few minutes to let people know about our next session, which is November 7th, 2016. We hope you'll join us there. For that session, we're going to have Vanessa Mitchell and Brad Anderson from Interior Health, and they're going to talk about the importance of story in cultural safety and spending some time doing that work. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today and really helping to advance again, Shelley. We really appreciate you taking the time out of a very busy schedule to share your message. So thanks, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Katie, I'm going to hand it back to you. Is there anything else you wanted to share before you wrap up?
December 7th. Not for me. It was absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks for joining us. We hope to see you again at our December session. And just a reminder, December 7th at noon, and we'll have Interior Health joining to share some of the work they've been doing about the importance of story to cultural safety. Thanks, everyone.